All right, so now we're recording. There we are. Anyway, Najla is going to have to watch the recording that we've just started here. So that's fine. That's one of the reasons why we do this, because sometimes life intervenes in our studies. And modern technology, hey, it's on the one hand, on the other hand, but a lot of times it saves the day, right? So
yeah.
Anywho, so all right. So Ashley, good to see you. Suzanne, how you doing real quick?
I'm chasing my tail. Maybe I'll catch it someday.
Okay.
I've been late. I'm running and scrambling around because I think I finally rented one of my rental properties. It's been empty for months and it's just always extremely stressful for me. But
Yeah.
they signed the contract and gave me a check today. So hopefully they'll stay for a while and they won't trash the place.
Yeah, yeah. I just moments before I logged on, I had a contractor here. It's gonna do some more stuff for me in my barn. So I know it's endless.
I was going to ask you about your barn project and if you got your flooring all in and
the floor is in, yeah. We're trying to get, I need some additional framing done on the inside to accommodate the overhead door and some other goofing around. So it's slowly but surely. I'm trying to get everything done before the first snowflake hits, so I can get in there and then during the winter do what I do. So if there is a God, but
what do you use the barn for in the winter?
Oh, I'm a woodworker, so I do a lot of woodworking. Yeah, I've got an endless backlog of projects because, like, I made my wife wanted a garden box for tomatoes, right? A raised garden box. So I built her one, and I got it sort of waist high, so you don't have to get on your hands and knees. As you get older, it sucks to be on your hands and knees. I ended up building 17 of them because everybody would come to go, oh, I want one of those. Can you make me one? You know, it's like, and it's all friends and relatives, right? So not gonna say no.
Yeah.
So I'm trailering these things all over the county, you know, and I like to do it, but you know, that's the kind of thing. And so now I've got all these projects everybody wants. Neighbors want me to do this, and I enjoy doing it. I make beds for the kids and desks and work tables and stuff like that. But I outgrew my old shop because I needed some, you know, as you advance, you need more tools to do more complicated things, which is fine.
Yeah.
But then you need the space. So my current shop, I'm like, I can't move stuff around and whatever. So we decided just to bite the bullet and put up a big barn and move all the stuff in there. My wife is a maker too. She does all sorts of craft things. So we're just going to have all of our making stuff in there and just go in there and do stuff till they wheel me out on a gurney.
Yeah, that's really cool. We actually had the same idea here. I like doing projects. I'm not quite at that level, but we were going to get a shed and make it a workshop. But we have not started that project yet. So
yeah,
I think I told Mike this, but I don't think Ashley, you know this. So my theory on men's shops and women's purses.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how big they are. They're full of crap and you can't find what you're looking for.
That's
yeah,
fair.
it can get out of control really quickly. There's no doubt about that. And keeping it clean too is another, you know, because every time you got to kind of have a system, like when you finish a project, all stop and you clean, you blow all the sawdust out and, you know, and whatever. Otherwise, everything piles up. You're sliding around and whatever, you're breathing in all sorts. So anyway, all right. So cool. So I'll appraise you all of my barn progress as we as we move along during the term. So we are learning how to build system dynamics models, hopefully following quote unquote a best practice, with the notion that there are styles of modeling, and if you stick with it beyond you know, just this one course, I'm hoping everybody does, and they say this was neat, I want to do more, you'll develop a style. And you know, you'll say, all right, Mike, I watched him do it this way or that way, and I like this, I don't like that. And so you over time will develop your own way of doing things. Having said that, there is sort of a best practice that we found over the years in system dynamics is, more or less get you where you want to be. There's a bell curve. Some people are very talented and produce stunning models. And then there's some people who can never quite catch on, but everybody else is kind of in the middle. And if we follow the best practice, we more or less become capable of building pretty good models. And that's what we're trying to do here. So we're going a little bit slow, but we want to make sure everybody understands all the steps, right? Okay, so having said that, with that, I don't know, caveat or whatever you want to call it, let me share my screen here and pull up. I've got a bunch of stuff happening here from other classes. So let me make a new model here. So bear with me 1 second. So hopefully everybody can see Stella here. Is that a true statement? Blank, blank. Okay. All right. Now, what we did was, just to recap a little bit so we can get to, the present day. We talked about simulation science, right? And what the computer does with Euler's method in order to solve a system dynamics model, whether it's linear or nonlinear, right? And that is it steps forward in simulated time a little teeny bit and finds the area of a rectangle below the flow curves, right? And then adds that to the stock or subtracts it from the stock, depending if it's a flow in or flow out. And then it steps its way through time, right? That's Euler's method. And we said there's different twists and turns on that. You can have trapezoids instead of rectangles and whatever, but that's basically numerical simulation or numerical solutions to dynamic models. And we looked at 3 basic models, right? We looked at they were linear, so we looked at their exact analytical solutions when we learned about them. And we said these are actually little molecules that we're going to see again and again, right? We learned about half-life and doubling time and time constants and all that stuff. Then we introduced the software and said, oh, let's look at those same molecules again. We at least looked at 2 of the 3 of them in a simulated environment, right? And we said, oh, let's look at doubling time and half-life, for example. And we said almost, we didn't have it, they weren't exactly doubling and halving because the computer isn't taking infinitesimally small steps, but you could see that, hey, it's doing the same thing, right? But now in the simulated world, right? And then we made the observation that these little molecules, in and of themselves, you can kind of see their behavior in the real world, exponential growth, exponential decay, but that we can combine them to make a bigger model. So the takeaway there is big models come from hooking together little models, but only after the little models have been thoroughly tested, right? Now, we also said that, well, once you know a piece of structure well and what it does from experience, you don't have to test it every time, right? But if you have a new piece of structure, or you're hooking together a bunch of small pieces of structure you know about, but you configure them in a new way, then yes, you must test to make sure that you understand how the system is operating. So with the molecules that had exact analytical solutions, we use those to find out about how the little pieces of structure behave, right? And we also looked at ratios of stocks and flows after we hooked things together, right? We looked at Little's law, for example, and the fractional growth rate of a stock. And we also talked about, in terms of best practice, first order control, right? And we said, if you have outflows in your model from stocks, a logical best practice modeling question to ask is, can those outflows, under some circumstances at least, drive a stock below 0? And if it can, does that make sense? If not, if negative people or negative cows or negative widgets or something doesn't make sense in your model, then you have to do something about that. Then that's called adding first order control. Okay. And by happy coincidence, one of our molecules had that built in. But as you're going to see as we go along, sometimes the logic that says pull something out of a stock, that logic in and of itself does not have first order control in it. And you have to add the first order control to the logic of the equation to make sure that when the thing is trying to pull something out, at some point it can't because there's nothing to pull out. So that's more advanced. We'll get to that as we go along, but that's, we're kind of setting that up. All right, with that recap, let's push forward. The techniques I showed you, while certainly valid and work, all the time in certain situations, it's not really the signature way of testing pieces of structure before hooking them together in system dynamics. The signature way of doing it is to use what are called test inputs. Okay, so let's take a look at that and let's push forward on our material here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plop down a stock.
They're called what again, Mike?
Well, I'm not sure. Test inputs, is that what you?
Okay, yeah, I didn't hear that. Okay.
Test inputs, yes, they're called test inputs. So we're going to plop down a stock here, and I'm going to call this expected order rate. Now, right out of the box, that's a soft variable, expectations. Now, in my world of economics, that's super important because a lot of decisions, economic decisions, are made not based on what is or even what is perceived to be, but rather what is expected to be in the future. Like if you're going to invest in plant and equipment to build a new facility, a barn in your yard, you want to presumably expect to sell the stuff you make in your new plant, right? Your new facility when it comes online 3.5 years from now. But you don't know for sure what's going to be the state of the economy, your industry, whatever, in 3.5 years. So you form some forecast or expectation, and then you go ahead and build the new facility, or you don't, right? You might, if it's a no, you might just postpone it. You might not cancel it entirely, but there's something about the expected future that's fuzzy. So modeling expectations, as you're going to see as we go along, is going to be hugely important. And how do we do that in system dynamics? So we have the expected order rate. So this would be the opinion of the managers of a company as to what they're finding, what they think the order rate's going to be for their product. Okay. Now I'm going to grab a flow here. Okay. And you can just plop it down if you want, or you could you can plop and hold and drag. So now I'm holding and dragging. See, I got my finger on the left mouse button. I'm holding it and dragging it. Either way, you can, well, that I goofed it up a little bit here. So sorry about that. So let me do that again. But what I'm trying to say is you can either plop it down and drag it, or being sloppy here. So that worked in a sloppy way. Or you can plop and hold and drag. Either way it works. And I'm going to call this change in the expected order rate. But in this case, I want to make it a net flow. So if I expect my orders for my product to go down, I don't want to make it go down with an outflow. And then when I expect my order rate to go up, I make it go up with an inflow. Instead, I rather would have it go up or down. My expectations change up or down with a net flow, with it's either adding to or subtracting from the stock. So now I have a buy flow or a net flow. Remember last time when we did a net flow, we had the birth rate and the death rate, one inflow, a uniflow in, a uniflow out, and then we subtracted the outflow from the inflow to make the net flow. And then we calculated the percent growth rate, right? Okay. My style is to always select a stock and copy it to the clipboard, Control C in the Windows world, get a converter and say initial, space, and paste, Control V. So it just saves a lot of typing. You know, if you're, if this was Ishkabibble, Worcester Polytechnic Institute Ishkabibble, typing that out and then typing initial Worcester Polytechnic Institute Ishkabibble, it's a lot of typing. A lot easier just to copy expected order rate, get a converter, say initial, and paste. But do what you want, but that's just my style. I like to initialize my stocks, as I've said before, outside of the stocks so that I can twirl the initial value. Now, in this case, that's not going to work. You'll see why in a minute, but it's just the way, it's my habit. It's the way I roll. You don't have to do it this way. So over here, I'm going to double click and my panel is going to open up just for the stock, not for the whole model, right? And I'm going to type in I, and it's going to look for anything that starts with I in the model. And there's only one thing, the initial expected order rate. So the initial value of expected order rate is initial expected order rate, right? I could have put just a number in there or something else, but that's what I chose to do. And we can say, you know, widgets per month. I think the model's in months. Yeah, by default it's in months. Doesn't matter. It could be weeks, days, doesn't matter. Okay. And the little warning sign went away, right? We can make this a little bigger actually. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a converter down and say actual order rate. So this is the orders that are coming into my company. Okay. In this model, this little piece of structure, it's going to be just exogenous, but presumably in a larger model, if we hook this up to make a bigger model, there'd be a sales force or web advertising or word of mouth or whatever that was causing orders to come in. But now it's just exogenous for our purposes here. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to take a telephone wire and make a feedback loop here. Actually, I probably should put this here. I'm going to link a wire here. I'm going to get a converter and say time to change expected order rate. And I'm going to go like that. And then I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this over here. And I'm going to go like this. Now let's talk our way through why I did what I did here. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to put in a negative, this is a negative feedback loop process. This is the most widely used molecule in all of system dynamics. And we've already looked at this. We looked at its exact analytical solution. We said the decay or exponential decay molecule, where it's an ice cube melting on a asphalt driveway or a drug dissipating from an animal or a human's body, or a plant and equipment depreciating away, or a capacitor or an inductor discharging in a radio. All of these radioactive decay, all of these things would be a special case of this. With exponential decay, half-life and all that, we said the goal was implied. The goal was zero. It was heading to zero, right? Here, we're going to have an explicit goal. If you make the explicit goal zero, it's going to default to the other molecule. The thing that throws you off is that visually they don't look anything like one another. So that's one of those things that just is. You know, it's like, well, why is it? Why change that? Make that not be the case. No, that's just the way it is, right? So the goal in this case, because it's a soft variable, so this is a little trickier, right? This negative loop here is trying to keep this stock at this target. Okay, and when when the stock is at this target, when the expected order rate is the same as the actual order rate, then the expectations are correct. Your forecast was correct. And you're not going to change what you're doing, at least in this molecule. Okay, yes, makes sense? Okay, so if we write this equation, now we've seen this molecule already. Let's rewrite it. We're going to say target minus stock divided by the time constant. Okay, now sometimes when the target says target for this, you say that's the target. Sometimes it'll say desired stock, and you say, well, that's the target. Sometimes it'll say goal for the stock. Well, you say, well, that's the target or the goal. But here it's a little weird. Actual order, how do you know that's a target? You just have to know the context of the modeling thing we're doing here, right? So as a forecaster, you're trying to be correct, right? And you're in equilibrium. You've reached your goal if your forecast is correct. And that would be when the actual order rate is the same as what you're expecting. So it's a little weird, but hopefully that's clear. Okay. So over here, so notice the little warning thing went away. Now, again, that's one of our big three molecules. And that has different interpretations. One interpretation is when you do PID controlling in electrical engineering or robotic engineering, chemical engineering, proportional, integral, and derivative control, PID. That's classical control theory, which is different from modern control theory. So that's the proportional part. You see the amount of correction if there's a gap between what you want and what you got. This is like a thermostat. What you want is your target. What you've got is your stock. The bigger the gap is between what you want and what you got, the more corrective action is called forth. In this case, the more change you're making to your opinion, to your forecast. And it's proportional to 1 over the time constant. So that's PID, proportional integral derivative control. That's the proportional control part. Now, why is there an I and a D? Because you're going to see as we go along here, proportional control can add steady state error to models, which is not good. Integral control can get rid of the steady state error, but it introduces instability. So to get rid of the instability, you need derivative control. So, and then you need, depending on the situation, you need more of this one and less of that one. You have to tune it to the situation and whatever. Don't worry about, that's just bigger picture context. For now, it's just a molecule we've seen before, but one interpretation, it's a proportional control structure. Okay. All right. So the time to change the expected order rate, we can make that anything we want. Let's make it 2 months. Okay. And let's make the actual order rate 1,000 widgets per month. Now, notice this is kind of like acceleration, velocity, and position. Remember, stocks are always in units per time, right? And flows are, stocks in terms of units, flows are in terms of units per time. So the units here are widgets per month, and the flow is in those units, widgets per month. Like acceleration is meters per second, and velocity is meters per second, right? So that's a little weird, just calling your attention to that, okay? And then we're going to say that the initial expected order rate, the initial value of this stock is the actual order rate, because we want to start in equilibrium. And we'll say it's widgets per month. Okay, so we're gonna start the structure in equilibrium purposely, because we want to shock it out of equilibrium to see what happens and analyze the molecule or the bigger model. If it's a bigger model, whatever is not a horizontal line after the shock must be the response of the model of the system to the shock. And we're always asking ourselves, does it make sense or is it doing something dumb? Just because the model runs and the equations are dimensionally correct and there's first order control and whatever, that doesn't mean it makes logical sense, right? We had models that were mathematically correct and ran, and they would make baby rabbits when there were no rabbits to begin with. It would make negative rabbits, right? So that was dumb, even though it was mathematically correct and the model ran. So you're always asking, okay, model correct, good, runs, good. Now, does it make sense or is it doing something dumb? Okay. So the easiest way to figure that out is put it into equilibrium and shock it out and watch what happens and then ask, does that make sense? So this is the signature way of testing system dynamics models, either a whole model or pieces of a model as you're building the model. So it's not that we believe real systems are in a state of equilibrium, real living systems, because remember, the time shape of equilibrium is everything's a horizontal line. And if you think of data from any real living system, everything is not a horizontal line, right? But that doesn't mean we don't use the concept of equilibrium to our advantage. It's very useful for testing. And sometimes we start a model, an entire model that's been tested in equilibrium. A lot of times that makes sense when there's some kind of shock that happens. Like we're going to do a heroin crime-related model where the whole story starts with knock, 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 armed police, and they crash in with a battering ram. That's shocking. You don't expect it. So you start in equilibrium and shock it out, and then what happens? So sometimes you even start a model in equilibrium, not because you believe real systems are in a state of equilibrium, but rather you're going to knock it out and then the story unfolds. But we certainly use equilibrium for testing purposes. So if we look at this equation here, when the expected order rate equals the actual order rate, then there's no corrective action, right? And we're in equilibrium. So if we were to graph this thing, this contraption we've just built here, right? Let's plop down a Cartesian plane here. And always good practice. So we're going to double click on the graph. So the panel that opens up is now related to the graph, right? We want to we're going to add the plus sign in there and say we want the target, the actual order rate, and then the stock, the expected order rate on the same graph, on the same scale with different line thicknesses so we can see when they're on top of one another. So we got a 2 and a 1 in terms of line thickness down here. Okay, so let's run the model. You know, we probably could have gone 3 and 2 for visual purposes here. Yeah. Some of this is tricky business. There we go. That's visually that. You can see that they're on top of one another, right? If they're the same line thickness, if they're on top of one, you can't tell. You'll just see the top color, okay? So that makes sense because we're starting the model in equilibrium. The expected order rate is equal to the actual order rate at time 0. And there's no pressure for change. Nothing happens. So good, we got it into equilibrium. Now, getting a model into equilibrium can be very simple like that or mind-blowingly difficult, depending on the complexity of the model. So one of the challenges as you become more experienced in modeling and build bigger models is, I got to get this sucker into equilibrium, and there's a lot happening here. How do I do this, right? So, but that's more an advanced topic. Okay. So now we want to test this molecule before we hook it up to anything else to examine its features. Now, we've already examined some of its features because we looked at its exact analytical solution. If you look at the slides, right? And it's the general case of the exponential decay and all that stuff. So we kind of know some of its features anyway, but let's look at some of them, but using simulation. So we can go over here and we can say, let's use a test input called a step function. And let's step it up to 100 in period 5. Now, notice the word step is in blue. That means Stella is telling you, hey, that's my word. You can't use it. You can't define something in your model as step. You can say actual order rate, but you can't say step. It's going to say, no, 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 that's my word. Stella's word, not yours. If you right click on it, it'll say jump to the definition, and you can see the definition of that function. It's a can function. So it's going to say a step function says B0 until time 5, month 5, then jump up to a value of 100 and stay there. Now, there are some additional features that they've put into the latest versions of Stella, because that used to be it. But now you can say, stay at that height for however long you want it, and then go back down to 0, or go up and down on some interval. So you can make it more sophisticated if you want, but we're just going to use a one-time step. So this would represent a permanent change in orders coming into this company. Okay. Now, it is not appropriate to say, well, that would never happen. That's not the point. The point is to say, if it were to happen, does this expectation structure make sense? Okay, so let's take a look at that. Let's run the model and see what happens. Now, first thing I see is, wow, by default, 100, way too much. We probably want to go out to like 15, something like that. And even then, I'm not sure. We might want to say, so I'm doing this in real time here. We might want to say 2, and we might want to make this 10. Okay, and then again, I might want to adjust this, and I might want to say, let's make the minimum value 500. Let's see, does that help us? Okay, maybe, I don't know, 800. And the maximum value, let's make it 1200, something like that. And we can see a little better what's going on. Again, could we tighten it up and make it, 900 and 1100? Yeah, I mean, so maybe my point of me doing this is the default settings aren't always the greatest to see what's going on, and you have to sometimes fiddle with things so you get a better visual as to what's happening. But you can see and by the way, if you just click on here, it'll tell you, what the values are at any given point in time. And I think we've discussed in the past, if we go up, hit the magnifying glass, and we go back in time, go in the time tunnel, if you want. I don't know if I had loops that matter. Yeah, I had loops that matters turned on. Oh. It's your choice if you want to keep that on as a default value. Found one feedback loop, there it is, right? It's a balancing loop or a negative loop, right? And it's responsible for all of the 100% of the behavior of the model.
Mike, where did you click to make the loops that matter panel setting come up? In the paper?
Yeah, in the paper, and then it says right here, calculate loop dominance.
Okay.
Right here. Now, it doesn't matter for small models, but for big models, it's going to slow it down. So your choice, you might want to only keep that on once you have all the 7 billion test runs done. Then you start to look at the feedback loops, but it's your choice. Smaller models, it doesn't matter. All right, so then the question becomes, given there's a permanent change in the orders, okay, and does it make sense that the expectations of the managers would change in this fashion? Okay, so one of the things you might ask is, well, the month, the day, whatever, that this big jump happens, are they going to change their minds? And it's probably not one manager, it's probably the management team. So they're probably sitting around the boardroom talking about it. Is this a permanent change or a temporary change? Was there a one-time blip because Taylor Swift was seen at a Kansas City Chiefs game using our product? And you get this big blip the day after, maybe the week after, and then it goes away. Or is it a permanent change? Well, you don't know right at the beginning. So this would reflect a gradual change in the expectation or the forecast of the management team, right? To a permanent change. So does that make sense, or is that weird? What do you think?
That's weird.
Why is it weird?
Because their expectations will always change, and not in a fashion like that.
Well, how would they change? So if it's not this way, how would they change?
You mean, like, is it going to be a step function when they change?
Well, the exogenous shock is a step. There's been a permanent change in this case, orders. And the managers experience that shock in month 2. And the question is, how do they change their, so it knocks it out of equilibrium. So there is pressure for change. How do they change their expectations? Now you might say, well, they would probably change more quickly. Well, we can look at that. So it might be they change, we got the structure right, but the parameter wrong. That they would update their beliefs more quickly. Okay. But that it would basically take on that sort of time shape. By the way, in economics, this is known as an adaptive expectation structure. It's used all the time in a bazillion econ things. Some twist or turn on this basic structure.
They may not change for a long time because they don't get it, because they're in denial.
Well, okay, so or it could go the other way, that there's a long time, a big time constant. So you'll see in the exercise, which you got to tell me if it was PDF'd or not, that you can mathematically show that another interpretation of this, in fact, hang on, let me find it. Another interpretation of this structure. So there it is. So we're doing, we're doing exactly what's in the homework assignment. So you can fiddle with the math here. I guess this bullet point is for here. So we needn't go through all the fiddling here at the moment. But read what it says here. The final version of the equation clearly shows that the current expected order rate is a weighted average of the previous expected order rate and the newest information. And it tells you what the weight is. As such, as that time constant is increased, and when you turn the wheel, right, more weight is given to the previous expected order rate and less is given to the new information. Okay. In other words, the history or memory or previous opinion matters more. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you turn the wheel the other way and make that time constant smaller, more weight is given to the new information. See?
So would that be a way to model, like, to capture the fact that an organization is slow to change?
Right.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So by and large, this is regarded as simple but okay for permanent changes. Later on, probably in the next course, we'll get into, yeah, but what if the time shape is more like an S and it's a different delay structure? But for a first cut, this is probably, there isn't anything horribly alarming here with this. We can quibble about what this parameter value should be. And I'm going to show you, I think today, I think we'll get that far, a way to find out what that parameter should be. That number 2 there, time to change expected order rate, to find out what that is. But for now, we just made it 2 and we can twirl it and see the effect of that. Okay?
So, sorry, just so I make sure I understand this correctly. So this model is modeling something in which it is adapting as they're getting inputs from the outside of the reality of what's going on, and that's changing essentially the output.
Yes, although it's we're exogenously shocking it to test it. So if we embedded this in a larger business model, the orders would be coming in because the sales force was knocking on doors, advertising was generating orders, word of mouth was generating orders, celebrity endorsements or whatever. And it would be, and then the orders would lead to revenue, and the revenue would be devoted to marketing, and the marketing would generate more orders as the feedback loop and all that. So now we're just looking in isolation. How do you test pieces of structure in isolation before we hook them up to other pieces of structure to make a bigger model?
Okay.
All right. So, and you can see in the exercises, quiz 7, you know, there it is right there. And you're asked to do what we just did. Now, the easiest way to do it, I'm just going to do it rather than typing. What if we were to take and copy this and put it in here? Now we got a pulse function. Oh, I copied the whole thing. So a pulse is going to be a one-time blip, a temporary input, a temporary blip. And there you go. So it blipped up and went right back down. And the expectations barely moved. So this is the pendulum swung from a permanent change to a one-time blip, and it's over change. Of course, the managers don't know when it goes up, is it permanent or is it going to go back down? These are the extremes. How'd it do? The expectations of the managers.
They stayed the same. It was a very short-lived phenomenon.
Yeah, they moved, if you look closely, they moved a little bit, but not very much. And of course, the more weight you give to the memory, to the stock, you can see there's no movement whatsoever, right? The red line here barely moves, right? And if you make it smaller, it's going to give more weight to the blip. The smaller you make it, the more weight is given. So you see the red line is rising now. It's giving more weight to the new information.
So that essentially means they're being more responsive to that time to change the expected order rate. Okay.
Yeah, they're giving more weight to the newest data coming in, which is the blip. If you make this bigger, they're giving more weight to the stock, their previous forecast, their memory, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So then the question becomes, does that make sense? With a blip like that, should expectations change dramatically? Because they didn't.
No.
And no, they probably shouldn't. Yet if it's a permanent change, should they eventually expect the permanent change? Yeah, and they can change your mind more quickly or more slowly, but that made sense. And then the blip makes sense. Okay, so the pulse and the step seem to make sense, with the caveat, this is a very simple expectation structure. I'll show you a more sophisticated one as we go along, but for the moment, we're not claiming this is the world's greatest expectation structure. We're simply taking a molecule that was generic before, giving it some context and exploring how you would examine whether that piece of structure makes sense or not, because you dare not attach this to a bigger model where there's all sorts of stuff going on, passing information to that thing. You don't know what's going to pass to it. And then it does something dumb. You're trying to see when it does something dumb, if it does something dumb, and then fix it before you hook it up. All right. So we seem to have passed 2 tests, even though we're going to acknowledge it's not the greatest expectation structure in the world. But that says a lot about the economics profession, doesn't it? Because it's used everywhere, and it's not the greatest expectation structure in the world. All right, how about if we do something like this? What if we have seasonal sales? So the base is 1,000, the amplitude is 50, the period is 12 in this exercise. So we already have the base. So the the amplitude was, what did I say? The amplitude was 50 and the period was 12. We could have done this outside of, I could have had some stretching in those parameters here, but so now we have a seasonal pattern.
So can I ask a question real quick, Mike? I would never know to use a sine function to be able to write that equation. So if I'm going to learn how to do system dynamics, do I just have to memorize these little models? No, I want to create that structure and memorize how to write the equation for it, because I would never be able to figure out the math behind that.
Memorize is kind of, who memorizes anything anyway these days? Because you've got Google. Nobody does. I would say, and then I'm restricting, so probably best not to restrict this. I would say you're aware of it. And now that you're aware of it, what's it doing? Oh, there we go. That's not enough. Now that you're aware of it, you can just look it up when you go, I don't really remember, what that was again.
How to write that equation?
Yeah, so go look it up, something like that.
Well, that's kind of what that's kind of what I mean is I will be able to remember visually what these structures look like that do the things I want them to do. To me, this is like learning a language. I don't need to know the derivation of why the word is that way. I just know that's what the word is. And if I forget, I go look it up.
Yeah.
To me, I can learn system dynamics the same way. When you pull the math out, it's like, I'll never remember how to write an equation like that.
Right.
I can look it up.
Just look it up then. Keep
Okay.
your molecules in a file folder.
Mhm.
And when you say, I need, I have a molecule where I have all the test inputs in one place and you can turn them on and off. And I just grab that and plop it down whenever I need it. I don't memorize these friggin' equations. And I often right click on the definition of the functions because I don't remember, is it height first, then time, or time, then height? I never remember that. And I don't bother to memorize it because all I have to do is right click, right? So you notice as I make the time constant bigger, what's happening to the red line, the expectations?
They're swinging wildly.
No, expectations are in red.
Oh.
Blue is the actual,
Okay.
and red is the expectations. So again, as I give more weight to the newest information, the expectations swing more violently. And when I say, no, pay more attention to your memory, your history, you get a smoother attenuation of the highs and lows, right? So again, what do we think about that? Seasonal sales, a lot of snow skis in the winter, but in the summer, your birthday's in July and grandma buys you snow skis because she knows you like to ski. So there's still snow ski sales in the winter or in the summer, but they're way less than in the winter. So the orders are going up and down. Again, do they really go up with like a sine wave? No, of course not. But we're not claiming the blue line is actual data or anything. We're saying if it goes up and down, are the expectations behaving properly or at least not improperly? We acknowledge there can be a better way to model expectations than this is super simple, but is it doing something dumb? I would argue no, it's probably taken off the highs and the lows, which is if you're expecting, a sinusoidal pattern, you're probably doing that, right?
Yeah. Well, and if you, based your stock off of that red line, then you would probably still have enough stock because you would be getting about the same the whole time. So you'd have a buildup when the sales are low that you could sell off when sales are high, right?
Probably, yeah. Yeah. If it was attached to an inventory management structure and all that, sure.
What would you do if it wasn't a perfect sine wave?
Well, let me show you the next step.
Okay.
So what's the next step? Now you can combine these things, but remember, simple first, complicated second. What if we have noise, randomness? Now we're going to not have a sine wave now, although we could have added this to the sine wave if we wanted. But now we're going to have noisy sales. And in this, again, you got to adjust your graphs because sometimes it's just, depending on what you're doing, you know, you can't see what's happening. So how we doing now? So now we've got sales are going all over the place. And sorry. If we, sorry, my cursor disappeared. There we go. If we make it more sensitive to new information, what happens to expectations?
They'll be more aligned.
Yeah, there'll be more, you know, and the more you pay attention to history or memory, the more basically you're finding the mean. So basically it's another interpretation of this molecule is as a smoothing or moving average. It smooths the data, takes the edge off the data. And you see it's finding the center line basically. But if you prefer to be more nimble, you know, is your company nimble, then you're going to be more inclined to look at new information or give more weight to new information. Again, these are stylized. So we're not saying that this is exactly what happens, but you can see there's a bit of an oscillation in the order pattern that it's finding. Right? But again, I would argue nothing crazy here. Is there a more sophisticated, a better way to model expectations? Yeah. But in terms of a very simple little molecule that we're using for this purpose, and then we acknowledge economists use it all the time in their models. How's it doing? And it's, you know, there's nothing alarming yet. It seems to be reacting. Like if you were to stick this thing in a larger model, and then the actual order rate is coming from marketing and word of mouth and advertising and, you know, Salesforce calling on customers or whatever, and orders are coming in however they're coming in. So far, we're confident that I would say that it's not going to do anything improper or crazy, right? That it's kind of handling things more or less. All right. What else we got here? How about if we look at growth? So we looked at a permanent change, a temporary change, seasonal orders, noisy or random orders. What if we have growing orders? Now, you could do this with an exponential because we said systems grow exponentially, not linearly, but it's easier to see when it's a linear growth pattern or a linear decline pattern, either way. So a ramp function is going to give you that. And if you look at the definition here, there's the start time, which is month 20, I guess. The stop, the slope is 20. The start time is the second month. And then the stop time is month 2000. Well, we're only going out to 50. So we don't want it to stop, just keep ramping. Okay. All right. So let's see what we got here. Now we've got a growing market. And it's a little hard to, let's see if I can do something better here with this to show it off maybe. And it's hard to. So what do you see? So in this case, every month you sell 20 more. So for 48 months, every month you sell 20 more. And the red line is your expectation. Okay, and let's change things before you answer. Let's change things. Let's go out to 100 months. Yeah, a little hard to see on this scale. If I went out to 1,000 months, it would look like this. If I went out to 1 billion months, it would look like this. So what do you think about that?
I don't think that models reality.
Okay, why?
Because at some point your sales are gonna, your order rate's gonna fall off because you're gonna be saturated.
No, we're not saying that. We're not saying that the blue curve is anything that's real. We're saying it's a test input. We're probing to see if this piece of structure fails us, does something dumb, as opposed to saying sales will grow forever linear. We're not saying that. We're saying, does the red line make sense if every month, to month 30, to month 300, to month 3,000, to month 3 million, to month 3 trillion, you always had 20 more next month? Would you not at some point begin to expect 20 more next month? And factor that into your calculation.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't grow
So
forever.
the red line should meet the blue line at some point, like it did with the step and even the pulse. Pulse back down, but it met it, right? Yes? Makes sense?
Yes.
So this is very bad. This is called steady state error. We have a situation where we have a negative feedback loop system. A system where a stock is seeking its goal, seeking its target, like a thermostat, a guidance system on a missile. And we have corrective action here. We have the P from PID control. We're saying if there's a gap between what I want and what I got, close the gap, fix it. And it can't do it. It gets locked in. It's not just that it can't do it. It's locked in. The red line will never reach the blue line. Even if a gigajillion months, it's always 20 more. It will never roll that into its calculation, which doesn't make any sense. This structure fails us with that test input. And that's called, why? It's called steady state error, which is almost always really bad. I say almost always because I can think of a couple times when it's good to have steady state error. Hang on. Let's make this B. Let's make it bright red because it's of great importance. And let's make it big. So steady state error is no good unless, number one, the purpose of the model is to show you what steady state error is. Then you want it to have steady state error. So in this case, it's good to have it because we're showing you what it is. So I won't say it's never appropriate to have it in your model. It's almost always appropriate to not have it in your model. The other time it might be appropriate to have it in your model is if you're doing a consulting engagement and you're in a company or some organization and they're having issues. And the issues are, you uncover the issues that's due to steady state error. You're asking people, what do you do? And they say, what you say, what's your rule for what's your forecasting technique, or what's your rule for ordering more pencils, or whatever the case may be. And you see that the rule generates steady state error. Then it's good to have it in your model. And then you tell the client, here's how we fix your problem. We get rid of steady state error. So those are the two times it's okay to have it in your model that I can think of. But generally speaking, we don't want it in our model, right? If a model is locked in where there's no pressure for change, it's in a steady state, then all of the stocks should be at their goals. There should be no pressure for change, for corrective action. With steady state error, you're locked in, but there still should be pressure for change because at least one of the stocks is not at its target. Okay, and that is a well-known feat. If you talk to a control engineer, robotics engineer, chemical engineer, people who do control theory, they'll tell you, well, we know that. We've known that for 100 years in these fields, that proportional control structures like this one generate steady state error. Not always, but sometimes. So that's why it's not just P control, it's PID control. You need the I and the D as well as the P. Okay, so you see how so this is not an electrical engineering, but what the takeaway here is, notice how we're using these well-known test inputs to probe a piece of structure to see if in response to these test inputs, it does, this piece of structure does something dumb. Something starts dividing by 0. Something goes to infinity. You have steady state error. Something goes negative and it shouldn't be. You need first order control. Whatever. You see? See how before we hook this thing up to something else, we want to make sure it's solid, it's robust, it's good. It doesn't do anything dumb. Yes?
Yes.
Now you say, wow, that's a lot to take in. Well, of course it is. And you'll get better at it as you practice. We're just whetting the appetite and making you aware of these things now. And then you're just going to have to slowly put them into practice, right? It's like with anything that's of value, but it's complicated. It takes practice. You have to just start doing it, right? And start being reminded of this as you go along and whatever. Okay.
So just to get the terminology straight, this is classic control theory.
This comes from, yes, classic control. There's modern control theory and classic control. This is from classical control theory.
Okay.
And it's called PID control. Anybody who's an electrical engineer, if you say PID controller, they're like, yeah, we do those all the time. Absolutely. They know exactly what that is. Anytime a robot's arm has to move, here's the desired position of the robot's arm. Here's the actual position. It has to move. It's a PID control thing. It's a self-driving car and there's something in the way. It has to turn out of the way. Or it has to make a left turn. It's a PID controller, right? And
are there lots of other things like PID and classical control theory, or is this just?
Yeah, and the modern control theory, they go with poles and zeros and the crazy math and all that, and they're all doing it onto circuit boards and all that stuff. So I don't do that. We don't do that in system dynamics, but it's the same concept as applied to now social systems, right? We're not trying to use a breadboard and make a circuit here, right? But it's the same concepts. Ms. Forrester was an electrical engineer, right?
Right.
Doing servo mechanism. All right. We got that. So we get the idea. All right. So let's take this idea and run with it, because a lot of people say, oh, so steady state error occurs only in situations of growth. No. So let's bring up a new model here. Let's call it inventory. And let's have a uniflow inflow here. We'll call that production. Let's have a uniflow outflow called sales. Let's have a converter called desired inventory. And in the interest of time, I'm going to be a little sloppy with my modeling. I want to mention equations and stuff like that. So don't say, oh, you didn't, we're just going to, because we're in a classroom situation with a clock ticking. Let's do this. Let's get a telephone wire here. Another one. Remember, I hit the Alt key. ALT, the Alt key in Windows in order to get the last tool back up. Time to produce. So over here, I'm going to click. I'm going to be sloppy. I'm just going to say desired inventory. I'm not going to initialize it outside, as is my style. You'll see why I'm doing that in a minute. It's to save time, but there's also another reason I'll show you in a minute. Let's say desired inventory is, again, 1,000 widgets. I'm not going to define widgets. Let's say 3 months to produce the whatever it is. And I'm going to put in my PID control structure, target minus stock over the time constant. Okay, so that right there is, where'd it go? Is this. Okay, it's the same molecule, except I've got a uniflow here because I drain inventory through sales. Not so this structure a moment ago was a soft variable, expectations. And they were changing, the stock was filling and draining through the same pipe. Here, I want to drain the stock through sales. Okay, so I've got uniflows. But you see, otherwise, it's a PID control structure over here. Same idea. Target minus stock over tau over time constant, right? And guess what I'm going to do over here? I'm going to put in your friend step, and let's step it up. What I say, 50 in month 2. That's what I had before, right? Same thing, but I had the step in actual order rate. Now I have the step in the outflow. So I stuck it in a different place, right? So far, everybody hears me? I mean, sees it, like is getting it? Okay. Always good practice. We'll put the target, which is desired inventory, and its associated stock on the same graph, on the same scale, with different line thicknesses. So you can see them when they're overlapping. So let's run the model. Oh, I shouldn't have made it 100. I should have, I don't know. Okay. So I knocked it out of equilibrium over here in period 2. It jumps up. Sales start at 0 because the step is 0 until this period, which is 2. Then it jumps up to 50, goes from 0 to 50. That knocks it out of equilibrium. It's a permanent change. So another good thing to do is graph your inflows and your outflows on the same graph on the same scale with different line thicknesses in case they're overlapping. Right, so the first one will make that 3, the second one 1. Okay. All right. So what do you see there? So the sales jumped up with the step in period 2. There was 0. We started in equilibrium. So the inventory was at its desired level. So no need to produce anything. There was no sales. Suddenly sales jump up to a permanent value of 50. And production ramps up and gets up to the new higher sales rate. You know, if we had said, let's produce faster, right? You can get up there quicker, right? Yes.
Right.
So that's kind of the same thing like when we were changing how fast do the managers change their expectations, right? But what's goofy? We got steady state error again, right?
Yeah, I
Look
was
at
going to
the
say
input-
our inventory is not responding to the increase in production so that we're getting back up to equilibrium again.
Yeah, so we have the inflow equals the outflow. The inflow starts by equaling the outflow. They're both 0. Then at the end of the simulation, the inflow and the outflow are again the same, 50. But the stock is stuck. We got the railroad tracks. They're not growing now. Now they're in equilibrium. The steady state is now an equilibrium steady state. We're locked into an equilibrium. Steady state is locked in. It doesn't have to be equilibrium. Equilibrium is one possible steady state. There are many. And we're locked in with the railroad tracks again. The stock cannot get back to its target.
So what's wrong with our model? Should we increase the time to produce? That doesn't seem to make any difference. Or decrease our time to produce. It doesn't make any difference. It's still locked in. So what's the matter with the model?
Aha. So again, what do we have? So the first key is, we're hunting for steady state error among a lot of other things. Do the stocks go negative and they're not supposed to? We need first order control. Does something divide by 0 and it shouldn't? Is something going to infinity and it shouldn't? Are our equations dimensionally incorrect? You know, well, there's a whole lot of stuff we're looking for here, just in a piece of structure before we hook it up to another piece of structure. Because if you don't do all this and then hook up all these things and start running the model, it's going to be crazy and you'll have no idea where the problems are. So you need discipline. So this is the discipline. All right. So yes, how do we, so we got we've identified the problem. There's steady state error. So how do we fix it? Well, in PID, you say, well, I need an I and a D. And there's mathy things you can do, and we do them in system dynamics too. But for now, let's use real world common sense rather than mathy stuff. Okay, so a common sense issue or common sense fix would be, it's not good enough to just correct for the difference between what you want and what you got. You also have to replace what you're losing. We're losing sales. So I modified that molecule a little bit, and I said, I also have to replace what I'm losing in addition to correcting between the difference between what I want and what I got. Let's see what happens now. How'd we do?
Well, we're at equilibrium again, but our sales are just slowing our production down because the assumption is that we will, you know, when we're producing and selling, that we will have some saturation at some point in the market. We'll satisfy the demand, right?
Let's talk instead about steady state error. Did I get rid of the steady state error?
Maybe
So
it's just
there's a
over
shock.
top of each other.
There's a shock, which by definition is unexpected or shocking. Right? And the production ramped up to meet the new higher level of sales. Last time it did gradually. This time it goes immediately up with it. And inventory never has to buffer anything. So inventory basically has two uses. The main use is buffering differences in supply and demand. Right? If there's suddenly more demand than there's supply, then you're carrying inventory, right? Because you don't know exactly, you can't predict the future perfectly. You don't know exactly what your demand is going to be. And inventory can have a marketing aspect. You know, car dealerships like to have every slot on their lot filled with inventory to say, oh, I'll pull in there to look for a car because they got a big choice, big selection. So it serves a marketing purpose as well. But for most, the main reason is to buffer differences in supply and demand on the inflow and the outflow. So there was a shock. Surprise! There's a big increase from 0 to 50. Inventory never changes. Why? Because production was perfectly predicted. The shock, which by definition is shocking, which is unpredicted, is perfectly predicted. So it's mathematically correct. The model works, but it makes no real world sense. So again, that's what we're looking for. Does it make sense in the real world? This does not make real world sense. Okay. Inventories are there to buffer shocks, to deal with shocks. Right?
So
Okay.
what if we down regulate our time to produce to a more realistic fashion and then run the model? Yeah.
Where I'm changing it right now. Nothing
Here.
changes. Nada. So that's not the answer. So what's the solution? There's a system dynamics solution. Let's look at it. Let's define something called average sales. I'm going to take a buy flow. So I want to go both ways in and out. So we'll call this change in average sales. The averaging process is not instantaneous. So we're going to say time to change average sales. And we need a target because this molecule right here is this molecule. And it is also this molecule. Same thing. We're using it again and again and again. Same exact molecule. Last time it was expected order rate. And this was actual order rate. Now we have sales and average sales. Remember we said with the noise, it kind of smoothed things and averaged the noise. So now we're using this molecule interpreted as a as an averaging, a moving average. And let's make the initial value sales. So average sales, then the molecule is initially in equilibrium, right? So we're going to put it in equilibrium. We put this guy purposely in equilibrium, right? The initial value of that is this, which is this. So it's initially in equilibrium. We shock it out. So we're doing that over here. So the initial value here of the average sales is sales. So when your next number that comes in is the same as the average number, the average doesn't change, right? We're going to get rid of, look at, I just pull it off. We're going to get rid of sales and we're going to replace it with average sales.
Oh,
Okay, and time to change, we can make that anything we want. And look at the equation here. It's target, which is sales, minus stock, which is average sales, divided by the time constant. The P in PID control. That's that same molecule. So this negative loop here is trying to keep average sales the same as sales. And it stops changing when the next sale is the same as the average. How about over here? Well, we probably want to add one other thing here. We logically know we want to drain our stock by sales. We don't want to add negative production to it, right? So if you had a situation with a lot of inventory and desired inventory was small, you'd have a really big negative number. And if that big negative number was bigger than average sales, you'd have negative production, right?
But that's not possible.
Well, the only interpretation would be you go in with a sledgehammer and bust up widgets on the assembly line or an inventory or something on the shelf. But, you know, the way you'd handle that would be there'd be another outflow like spoilage for, you know, your product is aging, your milk is getting old, and you at some point you throw it out. But that's not really negative production. So really negative production makes no sense. So the standard system dynamics formulation is this right here for this situation. It can be a little more sophisticated when we get to growth, but for now that's kind of a standard formulation. You'll see that a lot in system dynamics models. So we use max and min functions quite a lot. Now a max is a ceiling. So as soon as you have floors and ceilings, you're going nonlinear. So you cannot solve this model with calculus, with the standard, you know, Stratton Hall calculus stuff, Calc 1, Calc 2, and all that. See what happens now. Let's shock it and see what happens now. Does this make sense? Okay. So now we can make this, make it. So it's easier to see. Okay. So now there's the unanticipated shock. Inventory does what it's supposed to do. It buffers the imbalance between supply and demand. The higher unexpected sales draw down inventory while production is gearing up. Production over here equals sales, the new higher levels of sales at month 5, right? And month 5, inventory stops falling because the in and the outflows are again the same. But now you have to rebuild inventory to get to its desired value. So production has to go above the new higher sales rate to rebuild inventory. And then it settles into equilibrium. So we cured the steady state error. And it makes more sense in terms of what a business would do, right? The idea that the unanticipated shock is perfectly anticipated with the production exactly mimicking it is ridiculous. That doesn't happen. By the definition of a shock, it's shock. If they know it's coming, it's a different story. But if they don't know it's coming, it's shocking. You know, they can't change. Think about it. Production just is like, but production you have to order more raw materials, maybe hire more people, or put people on overtime, or get a new machine, another truck, you know, whatever, right? It takes time to do that. So steady state error is something we look for. It is not just in a growth situation. It can be in other situations. And it's when the situation, the model can get locked in to a steady state where it can't get out, and at least one stock is not at its target value. And almost always that's bad. Because by definition, with a control system with negative loops, if a stock is not at its goal, corrective action is motivated to fix that. Right? That's servo mechanism, that's thermostats, right? And this is sort of a standard generic structure. I guess it's not really a molecule, it's more of a generic structure. So rather than trying to figure out how to fix this, you just got to know this. This is a standard formulation in system dynamics. We're not, pattern model, real typologies, principles of systems, and you use the principles and the types in your next pattern model. So you got to know this stuff, and you don't go in mindless. You go in knowing stuff that can help you at the next crime scene or diagnosing the next patient, finding the pattern in the next patient. Right? Okay, how are we doing? Is that okay?
Mhm.
All right. Good.
So this is just the way when you have like production and sales versus just one thing that like just sales. So like the first one we did was kind of like just.
It was a buy flow, but it was a soft variable, expectations. And we said we're just changing expectations. So I want one pipe adding or subtracting from the stock to change the expectation. In this case, we have two different actors, the people making the stuff and the people buying the stuff. So we're separating the in and the out. So the net flow would be the in minus the out if you wanted to calculate it. We'd have to explicitly calculate.
But
So it just depends on the situation as to which way you want to model it.
Okay. And you need to have the proportional control structure on both elements then in order for it not to have those errors that we talked about.
Yeah, well, in this one, yes, absolutely. Well, in both cases, there was a proportional control structure, target minus stock over the time constant. And in both of those examples, steady state error was generated with the growth and with the horizontal time path. I showed you the fix for the horizontal time path. I did not yet show you the fix for the growth.
Okay.
All right. So big models are made by hooking together little models that have been thoroughly tested. Yes, you might say, Mike, we get it. Stop repeating yourself. But from years of doing this, I can tell you people I got the software. I got a problem. This is great. I got a key to the universe. And as fast as they can move the mouse, they build the gigantic crazy model. People do that again. I'll get that in that mode sometimes where I'm like, I got all this stuff in my mind. I just got to get it down somewhere. Which is okay, as long as you recognize it's brainstorming and then take one piece of it and start doing what we're doing now. Okay. All right. So let's try and put some of this stuff together into a larger model, because we've had basically first order systems here, one stock, a feedback loop going through only one stock. There were several of them that we hooked together, but they were all minor feedback loop systems that we linked together. So let's do something a little more sophisticated. Let's do an arms race model. So let's have country A and country B. And, this could be Coke versus Pepsi, hospital A versus hospital B. Hospital A has a MRI machine, so hospital B is going to get one too. Medical arms race, whatever. But this is the traditional, missiles or battleships before World War I, whatever. And let's say that country A has an inflow called a build rate. They build these battleships or whatever they are, missiles. And we have country B, we're going to make it symmetric. Build rate for country B. Let's say there is a dismantle rate for A, the things get obsolete. They rust and they become obsolete as the weapons designers come up with new designs for these things. And the same thing for B. Notice I got uniflows, right? So we're draining the arms stock of each nation by dismantling them rather than having a buy flow, having a net build rate. We could do that. We're not going to do that. We could. And let's use the second molecule, the ice cube melting on a hot asphalt driveway, or a drug dissipating from an animal or a person, or a radioactive thing decaying, or a capacitor or inductor dissipating its electromagnetic fields as the radio is being turned off, whatever. And we'll call this average life of the missiles or bombs for country A. And the same thing for country B. Now, we had average life of rabbits or whatever it was in that other model, right? So we said to avoid negative rabbits, we had the stock divided by the average life. And when the stock is 0, the outflow is 0, if you remember that molecule. This is the one with half-life, right? And this will be symmetric, so it's arms B divided by the average life of B. And let's make the average life of, I don't know, a battleship 10 years or whatever. I'm not dimensioning my equations in the interest of time. Okay. And then I said my style, initial arms A. And down here, initial arms for country B. Let's say there's 100 missiles or whatever, it doesn't matter. We can pick any numbers we want. The initial value for A is initial A, and the initial for B is B. All right, so before proceeding, does everybody see that? Yes, I know that molecule. Yes, I know that molecule. That's the ice cube melting, right? Almost looks like the bunny's being born and dying, almost, right? But in this case, we're not going to put a positive loop where arms make more arms. Maybe robots someday will make more robots or something. I don't know. Robotic battleships make more robotic battleships or something. But instead, let's say desired arms for A. And again, we're going to be symmetric here. So desired arms for B. And then we'll say time to build arms for A. Now we're making this symmetric, but it could be that different nations have different capacities to build, but we won't worry about that for this model. So we're going to stretch a link here, a link here, a link here. And let's say the build rate for A is what? It's target minus stock divided by the time constant. And we're symmetric, so it's desired target minus stock divided by the time constant. So a PID control structure, right? Proportional control. So unlike the bunny rabbit thing where we had a positive loop, bunnies making more bunnies, and then the death of bunnies, now we have that molecule from the production thing model from last time, right? But the dismantle rate from the or the death rate of bunnies, so these molecules, same molecules, being hooked together a little differently. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going a little fast in the interest of time, but also like I'm assuming you're seeing all this. You're not being baffled by this, right? Okay. So now, how do we beef this up or make it a little more interesting? Well, we could say the following. We could say perceived arms A change in the perceived of arms A, and then time to change perceived arms for A. So now we're forming a perception of what the other guys have. And here's the target. Now, looky here. I'm going to click over here and go buy flow, because that's like expectations, perceptions. I want one stock to just be added to or subtracted from by one flow, rather than there's something that's making perceptions go down and something that's making perceptions go up. What's the thing that's going to make perceptions go up and down? What the other guys have. So presumably that country B is watching country A with spies, satellites, listening devices, whatever, right? And their perceptions, their opinions are sort of lagging behind what they think the other guys have. It takes them a while to assemble the data and form an opinion. Now, we're not modeling all the details of the intelligence agencies and how they gather information. That would be a different model, right? So we're just saying that happens. So there's a delay between when country A changes its stock of bombs, arms, and the other side picks up on it. Okay. And by the way, the equation here is what? Target minus stock over time. The exact same molecule is over here, right? This is a special case of this. Here the goal is 0 and it's implicit. Here the goal is this, right? This is the skill that you begin to see these molecules appearing again and again, although they have different interpretations. Okay. And let's say we're going to start this guy in equilibrium. So initially their perceptions are correct. Just like initially we said the expectations were correct. Since we have a symmetric model, let's just do the same thing for the other guys. Copying and pasting makes you go faster. Well, of course, you have to change the names to protect the innocent, like on Dragnet, right?
Right. She's too young to know what Dragnet is.
I was about to say, Ashley doesn't know what Dragnet is.
No, I do.
The TV show, they would always say the names have been changed at the beginning of every show. The story you're about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. And again, the target over here, we got to move things around a little bit, I think here.
This is B's perception of their own stock.
No, this is what A thinks B.
Okay.
I might have named it A's perception of B's
B's.
arms. I guess,
Right. That makes more sense. A's perception of B's arms and B's perception of A's arms. No, yeah,
that's wrong.
Okay.
It's backwards. That's B's perception of A's arms. say A's
A perspective.
of these arms. Okay. Cool. All right. So everybody sees that this molecule is the same as this molecule, which is a special case, or this is a special case of it, and so forth. Right? We've seen these molecules a whole bunch of times. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now, what does the other guy? Does each side want to do? Well, on Family Guy, Stewie wants world dominance. So let's assume that neither side wants to be world dominant. But let's say that they have a, and this is true of the intelligence community. Well, Ashley probably knows this better than me, that a lot of times the intelligence community will add fudge factors in because they just don't know for sure. They're using listening devices, spies, satellites, whatever. So they often will add a squishy fudge factor in there, right? So, you know, we could say fudge factor for A, or a safety factor. It might be a little bit of a scientific name. Let's make the fudge factors initially 0, no fudge factors. So let's say that what does A want? Well, they want what they think the other guys have, along with any fudge factor or safety factor they choose to add in. So the fudge factor now is 0. So they just want what the other guys have at the moment. And it's symmetric. So it's what does B think that A has times 1 plus the fudge factor. All right. Now, before we do any simulations, what do you see?
Just a reinforcing loop.
Where's a reinforcing?
Around the outside.
Okay, so what you're telling me you see is a major
Yes.
feedback
Yes.
loop.
Yes.
You're claiming it's
Exactly it.
reinforcing, plus a
Yes.
whole bunch of minor
Minor ones, right?
feedback loops that are molecules basically we've already seen. By the way, what did I say over here? This is not right. Remember, we got to replace what we're losing. Oh, Mikey got lazy there. And we need to max out, right? Because we don't want to add negative bombs. And let's see. And I can probably get away with it.
Shouldn't we have done like all the testing and stuff on them before we connected them all together?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Yes, I'm pressed for time here.
Okay.
The class is ending in 15 minutes, but also, if you know what the molecules do, you don't have to retest them every time as though you don't know what they do and discover each time you use them, right? That was the point I made earlier. So we know we've looked at these molecules a whole boatload of times already, so we should have some idea in isolation what they do, right? But yes, as a general principle, more testing is better than less testing. So I'm putting in that formulation from the inventory where we had the railroad tracks horizontal, and we added replace what you lose. Now I got I think parentheses in the wrong place. We're expecting a closing print here. Let's see. Yeah. There. I think that's, what does it say? There's that. There's that. Sorry, unused input, right. My bad. So what I needed was, and I put it in, but I didn't put it in. There we go. All right. So let's see, what was I gonna say? So one takeaway is, aha, I see a whole bunch of the molecules that we've already studied in isolation. And we've already seen them hooked together a little bit in a different context. Now I see them hooked together in this context, which is kind of the same but different. I'm also seeing, if I'm you, a major loop where the loop goes through multiple stocks, not just through one stock. So there's major and a major loop and a whole bunch of minor loops, right? Oh, and then I could have put average dismantle rate A and B in here, but since there's no shock in here, I didn't, but you could do that if you wanted to make it look exactly like the horizontal railroad track case. Okay. All right. So what would we logically graph on here? Probably, again, interest of time, arms A. If this is an arms race model, and arms B. And we probably want to make sure they're on different thicknesses if they're the same and, you know, same scale and all that. And I think we started this guy in equilibrium, and sure enough, we're in equilibrium. Didn't I say 3? Hang on. Isn't that 3? And this is, what is this? 1 and 3. Oh. It just, oh. It just, you know, let me go like this. Let's make this one red. And this one, sorry. And this one blue. Maybe this makes a difference. Yeah, it's just hard to see. 3 and 1. 3 and 2. I'm just saying you got to play with these things sometimes so you can see them. All right. So let's say that the intelligence community says, you know, I don't know. I think they got 100. But I'm gonna pad it by 10% just to be safe. In fact, let's start padding it by 10% in year 5. When months or years, I don't know. Here. Okay, let's see what happens. So they're the same, but B starts padding their estimate in month 5. What do we got here? Oh. It doesn't like, oh, what do we got here? Inadvertent space in there, I guess. All right. So what do we got? Don't think that's too thick. We got us a
Exponential growth. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exponential growth, but you get, well, because there's a dominant positive loop, major loop. And it's not because one side wants to dominate the other, it's out of fear or uncertainty, right? I mean, it's a deterministic model, there's no noise, but you get an arms race, right? So, Suzanne, you correctly said, well, there's a dominant, or they're not dominant, but you said there's a positive loop. By the way, we could say, do we have loop dominance? Yeah. What does loops that matter say about the loop dominance here? Okay.
Because it's the outside major loop. Well,
That's the one responsible for 97% of the behavior of the model.
right.
The positive loop. The major positive loop. Okay. Now, what if I do this? Let's make that fudge factor back to 0. Let's make this initially 50. So our B starts with 100, A starts with 50. Now what?
They've each sought equilibrium
So
because
is it a
there's,
positive loop now?
well, it's still a positive, well, it's a goal seeking loop now, so it's a balancing loop. Because it's seeking equilibrium because there's no fudge factor in there.
So there's a little bit more of a split among the loops, but the balancing loops, that one and that one are the biggies that are controlling this behavior. So the negative loops are controlling it. What do negative loops do? They seek a goal, right?
Mhm.
Right. So they become dominant. The positive loop is no longer dominant in this case.
And is that just because of the fudge factor is no
Fudge
longer
factors, well, okay. so
zero?
I don't know. Let's put it back. I think it depends on the relative magnitudes because this isn't a very feedback rich. So, okay. So they seek each other and then the fudge factor really kicks in. You get the arms race.
So, okay, so let me see if I understand this. So without the fudge factor, which is a value judgment based on one side or the other, the system is structured in such a way that no matter what the starting values are, it seeks equilibrium. Because one starting value was 50 and one was 100, and it's still within a relatively short period of time, a couple of years, it sought equilibrium. And then you added the fudge factor.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Right. So,
This structure without the fudge factor in it, regardless of what the starting arms are for either side, its structure seeks equilibrium.
well, so it did, but then it took off, right? Because I didn't step it at period 5 or whatever.
Well, that's what I'm just saying. If there's no fudge factor in there, if it's 0, it seeks equilibrium.
Oh, if that's what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing that's a more subtle point here. What did I say here? Just said 0, 0. What was this? I guess I want to say it. So what does that kind of look like?
Steady state error.
Yeah. So I think we have steady state error in this model. Now that would be a clue. We could run it farther out and see if it starts to converge. It won't, but you could say, well, what if we ran it out to 500 years or whatever? The other clue would be we have proportional control structures all over here, all over the place. 1, 2, 3, 4 proportional control structures, just the P. And we know proportional control structures can cause steady state error. So I mean, the purpose of this model is to just show you these molecules hooked together differently and to make a major loop now for the first time. I'm less concerned about the steady state error. But if you add some more structure here that I don't have time really to go over right now, you can cure the steady state error. So remember in the ramp case, I didn't show you the fix. I showed you the fix in the horizontal steady state error. The ramp thing, I just said we got a problem here and I didn't show you the fix. So here's a fix, but there's not enough time to get into this. I have a whole presentation on this fix here. Actually, this is a simplified version of it. There's a little more elaborate version of it. So we know how to fix these things in system dynamics, the steady state error thing. And I'm looking at my clock, so I don't think we're going to be able to get that far tonight. So let me tell you where we're headed. So next time, I'll do the whole presentation on how to fix the growth steady state error situation. And I'm going to do it by showing you how I helped out Sir Roy Harrod. Do you know who Sir Roy Harrod is? Rhetorical question. I knew you wouldn't. But if you were an economist, you would, because he's a very, very, very famous economist. they say he would have won the Nobel Prize, but he passed away. The Nobel was first given in economics in 1969. He passed in 78, and they had such a backlog of famous economists to give it to, like he was in the backlog, but he passed away before they gave it to him, and they don't give it posthumously, but he would have won the Nobel. And he's known for something that's in every textbook, macroeconomics textbook, intermediate level textbook and advanced textbook, known as Herod's knife edge or Herod's razor's edge. By the way, Herod's family owned what department store in London?
The Harrods department store.
Interesting.
What year did the War of 1812 begin?
1812.
1812.
Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
Great.
All right, you get the idea. So, yeah, Herod, his family owned Herod's. They don't anymore, of course. He was an economist at Oxford. And his goal in life was to generalize the general theory. So Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, invented macroeconomics by writing a book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money in 1936. And his intention for writing the book was to explain why the Great Depression was happening and how to get out of it. And along the way, he created what we know today as macroeconomics. He wasn't trying to do that. He was trying to explain the Great Depression and tell the policymakers what to do about it. Well, Herod at the time was a young man, and he was listening to Keynes's lectures and communicating with them. And Herod set out to generalize Keynes's general theory, because Keynes was writing about, well, we're in the Depression, how do we get out? And Herod wanted to take Keynes's ideas and extend them to the long run, wanted to generalize the general theory. And along the way, he created something that's known as Herod's knife edge or Herod's razor's edge. It's in all the textbooks. That's what he's mainly known for. He did a whole boatload of things. He's remembered for Herod's knife edge. The thing is, on his deathbed, he said, I never said there's a knife edge taken out of the textbooks. He denied to his dying day he ever said anything about that, and he was furious that Herod's knife edge was in all the textbooks. So you're mischaracterizing what I said, and whatever. So I set out to help old Sir Roy, and he was an economist at Oxford, and I presented my results at Oxford. And I'll tell you next time whether whether Sir Roy was right or wrong.
So
and we did it using system dynamics.
So it's same bat channel, same bat time.
In the radio business, they call it a teaser. So you come back after the commercial. So if you come back next week, I'll show you how I addressed Herod's razor's edge, and we'll see what happened with Sir Roy.
Ashley didn't watch the Batman show either when she was little Mike, so she doesn't know. Same bat channel, same bat time.
Yeah. That's very sad if you never saw
it. It is
that
very
show.
sad. Very sad.
It was a very campy show. It was unusual for that era. It was 2 nights in a row, and they had a cliffhanger at the end of the first night, and then it was resolved the next time. And it was a silly cliffhanger, but like Batman and Robin were hanging upside down above a shark tank or something, and they, how do they escape? And then the next they escape. But it was so campy and famous that all these Hollywood celebrities fell over themselves trying to be a guest villain on the show, because it was just such a thing to be a guest villain on Batman. So all these famous actors from the golden age of Hollywood and all that were villains in the Penguin, the Joker, and all that
Meredith stuff. What was his name that played the Penguin?
Burgess Meredith.
Burgess Meredith. I just thought he was hilarious.
And it was comedic and campy, unlike the Batman movies today are very dark and sinister and serious and all that. No, it was very funny and
I can remember. You should look them up, Ashley, and try and watch a few episodes. But I was the youngest of 5. I had 4 older brothers, and I can remember we would be sitting with our pillows on the floor waiting for the Batman show to come on. And I couldn't read yet. I was only 4, and my older brother was 7, and he could read. And when they would fight on Batman, they would have these big bubbles that would come out over people's head and
Oh,
say, "Bam!"
wow. You know,
Oh, right.
bam, yeah.
And I would tell my brother, I would say, read it to me, read it to me. And if he was mad at me because we'd gotten into an argument or something, he goes, no, I'm not gonna read it to you. You can't read. You know, and it would just infuriate me that he would not read the Batman bubbles to me. It was a very big incentive for me to learn to read.
Anyway, classic American TV. So we'll leave it there. Same bad time, same bad channel. So any last this is or that's before we adjourn for tonight?
No, this is super, super helpful to me because I will have these videos to go back to as I'm actually sitting there trying to do this in Stella, and I can create and make little notes about the models. And I think there's going to be that comfort of knowing I've got the solution that I can go look at without making myself insane trying to solve it, spending too much time. I can struggle.
That's the right answer, is to take the tapes and try and repeat everything and figure out, you know, how did he do this? And, you know, that's the key to learning how to do all this.
And the models, I can see how you'll get familiar with them and know what they do, just like, you know, a certain order of letters makes a certain sound or whatever. It just will
absolutely. You know, the testing thing, when you're a veteran, and then there's ways to speed up everything we're doing.
Right.
A lot of canned functions where if you want to smooth, you don't take stock, biflow and all that. It's a canned function. You just And so, you know, veteran modelers go way quicker than this and to take a lot of shortcuts, but they of course have a lot of experience and know what they're doing.
But they understand what they're doing and what the symbolism underneath it, so that it's logical and makes sense. So, but this is important, I think. And I know everybody learns differently, but this clicks well with the way that I learn. I think about the other SD 550 course that I took that was taught by Oleg. You know, they just took a completely different approach. There was some value in that, kind of getting a historical perspective and learning how to think holistically and systemically, but trying to get us to model anything was so frustrating. I was like ready to rip on my hair
everybody
out.
has their different twist on, you know, like a first course in system dynamic, or how to take somebody from a novice to an expert. Like Khalid Saeed, my 40-year colleague in system dynamics, does it very differently from me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, you may not use a Uniflow in his class. He'll mark it down on a homework assignment if you use a Uniflow. I'm like, well, I don't get that, but hey, do whatever you want.
Right.
But he has a very different style and way of bringing somebody along.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just very different from how I do it. So if you were studying with him, he would be taking you on a different path. Like I say, it might be for all I know, it's a better path, but it's just different.
I think it really depends on what the students' strengths are and how they conceptualize things. That other class that was, they used the videos and stuff from the Gym Squared, you know, I really like those videos. It was very helpful from a holistic perspective. But when they're trying to teach us to model, they didn't go into any of the theory about why these structures did the things that they did. It was
Well,
just
here's another thing.
Together Fishbank's model, which was just making crazy.
Historically, it's been difficult to even define, you know, what does it mean to be an introductory system dynamics?
Right.
What should you know after taking one course in system dynamics? What should a well-trained system dynamicist know how to do? Nobody can agree that I'm aware of on what that means. Different people have their opinions, but there's no consensus as to, because it's kind of like a calculus sequence is kind of like, no matter where you're at a university, you kind of start with limits and pre-calculus, then limits, derivatives, basic integrals, trig functions, triple integrals, and partial, you know, and there's kind of a well-known, more or less sequence. There isn't such a thing in system dynamics that I'm aware of, you know, so everybody kind of does it differently. And I'm not saying anybody's is right or wrong. It's just I do it the way I do it because it seems to work for me. But
Well, and the other thing too is there was a lot of jargon and stuff wasn't explained, historic things, a lot of engineering jargon where they would just use acronyms and just blast through it like everybody understood what that was. And it was
I know
just
acronyms.
maddening for me.
Acronyms are in the business world, military, government. You know, you go in as a consultant and they're throwing acronyms as fast as you can, like fastballs, and you're trying to catch up and going, I don't know what you're talking about, because everybody else in the room knows, but the new guy doesn't know. So yeah, acronyms are tough. Yeah. So anyway, so good.
But this
So
is helpful.
short answer is good. That this is resonating. I'm hearing it's resonating. Ashley, I'm assuming you're flying the American flag. So I mean, I'm
Yes.
assuming that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I guess my systems dynamic thought of the week. I've been reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good book.
And he talks in that book about kind of the expertise fallacy of how sometimes when you're an expert, you kind of get an ego and then you make grander assumptions about something that maybe is warranted for the situation. And so I've just really been thinking this week about the applications of systems dynamics to counteract some of that, where even if you have a lot of experts in the room, it's kind of like how you introduced it to us. Systems dynamics could be used as kind of a check and balance to more outlandish assessments that are being made even by experts. And I don't know. So that's where my head's been. I just think that could be a really interesting avenue to pursue in a thesis or dissertation context, in how it could be applied to actual analysts or policymakers. I mean, obviously that's kind of what system dynamics was built to do, but anyways, so that's what I've been
group model building when you got experts
Yeah.
and stakeholders in a room. Yeah.
So Ashley, what you're saying is it would be a means of helping them sort through their thinking and kind of nailing it to the wall so they can look at it and say, yes, that's what I was trying, that's why we're establishing this policy. And then it would make any assumptions or perceptions be more obvious. Is that right?
More or less. And basically when you're making an assessment, so say Kim Jong-un launches a ballistic missile over Japan because he wants to test something. If you were a new analyst or even a seasoned analyst, and he hasn't done that before, you could be like, oh, North Korea wants to go to war with us tomorrow. Whereas like if you had looked at a broader range of indicators, it would tell you that that's not necessarily the case, because that would be a worst case scenario thinking, or kind of a more sensationalized way of thinking. And so when you see pundits on TV, they tend to be sensationalized versions of analysis on any topic. So anyways, just system dynamics could be that tool to pull people back and be like, well, that did happen, it's important, but maybe not as important as you think. When something, but I think it's really interesting, and I think I'm following all the technical aspects of it, but I'm just starting to think about how it can be applied in other ways. So it's very interesting.
Okay, good. I'll leave you all with this. The key to me helping Sir Roy Harrod is Daniel Kahneman.
Oh,
So you'll find
There
out
you
how I did
go.
it next week.
that's very validating for Ashley.
It is.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next
Have a good
time.
week. Thanks,
All right.
Mike.
Yeah, bye.